We're going to start with a contribution to the Dáil today by Maureen who is the Independent TD for Dublin Central, which is the inner city part of Dublin, one of the most disadvantaged areas in the country. And it's surprising that it's one of the most disadvantaged areas in the country, since it was represented by the Taoiseach for many years. That was Bertie Ahern. Anyway, let's have a look at what Maureen O'Sullivan said in the Dáil today.
Published last October on details on their website about details of funding available for the different lots under the social inclusion and community activation programmes. And the levels of cuts being proposed seem to be 10% in rural areas, 20% in urban areas, but 38% for areas in Dublin's inner city. And it's a factor of 38% there. Now, those cuts are for communities that have much higher than the national rates of unemployment. There are communities of really extreme deprivation, very high numbers of lone families. There are issues that are being presented by the new communities. And we have areas of greater disadvantage than other parts of the country. And even though progress is being made in educational attainment, progression to third level is much lower than it is in the rest of the country. And it's an area that has seen the loss of the public-private partnerships and the regeneration that it had been hoped that they would bring. So this 38% cuts are going to community organisations that are working on community training, community education, working with lone parent families. They're providing affordable childcare. They're working with people in addiction, and they are dealing with new realities that come up every day. For example, different drugs that come on, a most recent one being ice, a cheap synthetic drug that has led to a number of deaths. And it's the community organisations who are responding to those issues as they arise. How can these community organisations proceed and make progress if it's 38% cuts that they're going to face?
You've raised an issue that Minister Kelly is actually aware of, Deputy Sullivan, because he has undertaken to look at the question of the funding of community organisations and entities, like you mentioned. Oftentimes, it's necessary to draw funding from different state agencies for these kinds of communities or these kinds of organisations. And as you know, there's a private member's motion down today on the question of social inclusion, and the Department of Social Protection, I think, have worked very hard at that over the years in respect of the different facilities and contributions and opportunities that they've put together.
I'm struck by a couple of ironies. One is that the social inclusion programme is targeting those people in society whom these community organisations are working with. And I was also struck when I was in the GPO for the launch of the commemoration programme for 1916. You know, the GPO is not a stone's throw from some of these really, really disadvantaged communities. And if the Rising was about anything, it was about equality. And, you know, this is not about equality.
Regina, Enda was asked a straight question today. How can these community projects that do so much for communities, disadvantaged communities, how can they survive when there's a 38% cut? The cut in public expenditure generally is 7%. Why target the most disadvantaged areas?
Well, first of all, there's no targeting the most disadvantaged areas. There is a reorganisation of this particular fund, and the way it used to be distributed wasn't necessarily fair on a national basis. It was allocated by the department, and it was open or subject in some cases to patronage. The new scheme and fund that's being established, which does, in fairness, have a small drop in overall funding from the old scheme, from 70 million a year to 62 million a year, and how that will be allocated is based on an index, based on county by county, based on deprivation. And so, whilst acknowledging obviously what the Deputy said today, that her area might be hit more than obviously other areas.
Is hit, 38%.
Well, is hit, but actually, and you have to take in fairness cognizance of what he said at the end of it, was that the special task force would be set up to look specifically at that area and maybe break it up, because there are some fairly affluent areas in the overall area that Maureen represents, and maybe that is skewing it on the overall index. But let's be clear, the ultimate aim of this scheme is to get the resources to where they're needed most, but based on the deprivation index, not based on if you have a relatively strong TD in your area, which was the practice heretofore, and that's not right, because whilst that area might have actually gained, there are other areas that didn't.
Almost all of the programmes targeted to relieve disadvantage, all of them have been cut far more than anything else has been cut since this austerity thing began. Like, the community,
well, no, 4% is what the overall cut is, Vincent.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
In this year it is, or next year it will be. But since this government came to office, or certainly since 2008, the cuts in community development has been 45%, while, as I say, public expenditure cuts has been only 7% overall. Cuts in travel programmes, for instance, the most disadvantaged community in the entire country, cut by 80%. And you know, there's lots of other statistics to illustrate how disadvantaged communities and disadvantaged areas have been. It seems targeted. I'm sure that. And
actually, I wanted to argue with you, and I don't disagree with the practice of what's happened in the past. But that's the reason that there's a reorganisation of this funding. That's the reason why there's an index that has been designed so that it actually goes to the areas that it's needed and not
like
to
community
the people.
development schemes were a means whereby, which were the lifeblood of disadvantaged communities managed, and they've been devastated over the last several years. What's the justification for that?
Well, the justification, first of all, was that the country nearly fell off a cliff and we didn't have the money to spend.
But why would they cut more viciously than any other area?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you, so I'm not going to waffle. But let me tell you what this reorganisation of the funds has done is to redistribute the amount of money that we have, which is 70 million a year, to the entire nation.
Isn't it
all of which, it's not pathetic.
I bet there's more money going to greyhounds.
Well, no, I don't know how much is going to
I would have a guess.
So I don't know.
Joe, you'd know about greyhounds, given where you're from, and the money going to greyhounds. But it's a guess that more money goes to the greyhound industry.
I would doubt it, to be honest with you, but...
Certainly more money goes to the horse industry. Absolutely, in terms of tax breaks and all that.
Well, substantial funds have gone to the greyhound and horse racing industries over decades, totally out of all proportion, as a matter of fact. The answer is that working class communities are not a priority with this government. Fine Gael essentially represents, at core, the wealthier sections of society. The Labour Party represents itself. And betrays communities routinely. The media, or most sections of the media, don't much care either. Witness the disgusting demonisation and vilification of the people of West Talla in relation to the recent anti-water charges protest. But Maureen O'Sullivan is correct. These cuts are having a devastating effect in many communities. In the inner city, obviously, there are particular difficulties with educational disadvantage, childcare issues, addiction problems for sections of the population. And when it comes as a choice between paying debts that we have no responsibility for to bondholders, or investing money in communities where ordinary people live, unemployed people, low-paid workers, etc. There is no choice as far as the government is concerned. It goes to the former. The other issue that is quite disgraceful is the move towards the private procurement now of some of these services. So pitching local people who have been organising in the community, who have done really excellent work as some of these programmes, which are very important for local services, pitching them now against professional, perhaps major, even multinational companies who will come in to pitch for state grants. It's quite outrageous.
Gina?
First of all, to take Joe to task, that Fine Gael don't represent a particular class of people. They represent anybody that wants to follow the policies that we pursue. And that stems from every corner of the country, not just a particular class, and so I object sincerely to that. The reorganisation of this particular fund is to ensure that the people who are underprivileged in every part of the country get addressed with programmes that are needed to fulfil their needs. So, Joe, am I right in saying that you think it's okay that a particular constituency in Dublin gets more money than your constituency or my constituency, even though there are index levels of deprivation in Meath and in Dublin West? You think it's okay that because of patronage in the past, that certain inner city constituencies get more money than the rest of the county, even though it should be on the basis of their needs, not on their representation? Because I don't agree with that.
What on earth is the basis for that stupid question to me. How in any way
you
did
just said that you totally think that us taking the money off the inner city constituencies is wrong. Well, what I'm saying is, that what we're doing is redistributing the money based on people's needs, not on based on people's geography.
First of all, I never said that any section of the country should be favoured over another. I used the inner city because it was the case in point raised by Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan today, and very eloquently so. That's why I raised it. Not to pit working class people against the same in other areas or against rural communities.
But if we don't redistribute the money on the basis of need, where are you supposed to get the money?
With respect.
For Dublin West or for
That's
Meath?
what Fine Gael deputies do, as one of your colleagues called people of Dublin parasites disgracefully last week. What you're redistributing is misery, because you're paying so much billions every year to pay off debts for bankers and European bondholders that our people have no responsibility for. So there is less left for our people who really need it. That's the priority of this government.
Is a social inclusion fund that's actually there and required by communities the length and breadth of this country to enhance their lives. That's what we're doing. We're trying to do it on a fair basis, on the basis of deprivation index, as opposed to the basis of where people were based in the country. No, actually, I think that's the right thing to do. I don't think it's the wrong thing to do, to give extra money to particular constituencies because of the particular representative that they might have had looking after them.
Who said anything of that nature?
Go look at the statistics in the past,
you were trying to create a red herring and a diversion.
The facts speak for themselves. Go look at the way the funding was issued in the past.
The facts also are that community employment schemes have been devastated by cuts, 45%. What's the justification for that?
Well, as I told you earlier on, the only justification is that we didn't have the money to spend. And now that we do, Vincent, we're trying to distribute the money.
On Newlands Cross, for instance.
Well, that's infrastructural projects, I suppose.
And do you think that takes priority over saving communities from utter misery?
Well, personally, what I believe is that people should have come first over infrastructure. But I wasn't in charge, and it's probably just as well that I wasn't in charge, because one thing has to become in tandem with the other. And so, OK, maybe you are right insofar as that this particular section was ravaged over the last number of years, but what this is seeking to do is to readdress the distribution of the money that we have, and now that fund is actually growing, which is good, but to redistribute it in a fair and equitable manner based on people's needs, not on based on where they live.
Joe has made, Mary, Joe has made the point that not alone is the as he would put it, the political class uncaring about the misery they cause to people, low-income people. But so that's true of the media as well. Is he right?
I don't agree. I mean, I think Maureen O'Sullivan's contribution today was the outstanding contribution in Leinster House, and she's a totally authentic voice. And when she speaks about the stress and distress of people in Dublin Central, you can't but believe her. I mean,
will she get headlines in tomorrow's Irish Times?
I certainly
front
hope
page
so.
headlines.
No, she probably won't get front page headlines, unfortunately. But this is.
But wouldn't you think that what she drew attention today is deserving of front page headlines? We'll look at it a little later, or maybe we get the front page of the Irish Times before we end this discussion.
What she's talking about is, not, protecting community groups that are running coffee mornings in South County Dublin. She's talking about community groups that intervene when young people begin to take these cheap synthetic drugs that she speaks of, again, with a certain amount of authenticity, and, not too many TDs would have that kind of in-depth knowledge of their communities. She talks about these communities being a stone's throw from the GPO, which was, she referred back to 1916, which was about, totally about equality. I think her contribution today really pointed up the increasing rise of a discussion of class in our political discourse. That it's something just I haven't encountered for quite some time, and I think it's bound to be because of the pressure of an election on the way, with 17 months maximum to go now until the next general election. We're hearing things, I suppose, just blunt appeals to party bases, and it's in this instance difficult to escape.
Why do you call reference to class a blunt appeal to?
Well, I'm thinking of Leo Varadkar at the weekend, saying that he represents a party that represents Middle Ireland. I think Middle Ireland now has lost its original meaning and has kind of become synonymous with middle classes. He was talking in the context of Irish Water when he was taking on Brendan Ogle, the leading water charges protester, and he said that Brendan Ogle's recent comments are a thinly veiled left of centre code for taxing the middle classes more. And Leo Varadkar is saying, you know, as a party that he believes represents Middle Ireland, why should we, he says, have to pay higher taxes when others are paying nothing? So I think, you know, you're seeing now a very, very blunt appeal to a party base as the election approaches. And it is hard to escape the conclusion that Fine Gael is favouring its base, put it that way.